The 90s were all about discovery. Seiyu units were just starting to be a thing, and there was still plenty of new, unknown path left to trail. It's a crazy era, but as it is expected whenever there's something experimental, it was a pretty interesting era. In this episode, you and I will revisit some of the Seiyu units that paved the way for Seiyu to be taken seriously as singers and for Seiyu units to really become a trend. Let's dive into a bit more detail, exploring their sound and influences, what made them stand out and eventually influence the following generations of Seiyu units. Let's kick off this episode of Seiyu Lounge. Welcome to Seiyu Lounge, I am your host Vanessa, and today's topic is the second generation of Seiyu units, the rebellious 90s. After covering the 70s and 80s that were all about taking that shot in the dark that enabled, in a way, generations of Seiyu that followed to embrace the idea of debuting as a part of a Seiyu unit, it's time to cover the decade that changed it all and made Seiyu slightly cooler to the eyes of the common fan of anime or even voice acting. So I'm not going to talk solely about EMU or Vice. I'm bringing many Seiyu units, most I believe you're not even familiar with, to this episode. As you can expect, all units that debuted in the 90s are no longer around, as the Seiyu members of those are now in their mid-50s, early 60s. Still, if you find any to be interesting, I've left links in the description and the Japanese names in kanji for you to get to know more about them beyond what I'm talking about. How was the music panorama for Seiyu units in the 90s? In the 90s, Seiyu units were just starting to become common, so there was still a sense of strangeness about the possibility of Seiyu teaming up to sing. At the same time, in the 90s, although there were some Seiyu that had really good singing skills and ended up having long solo careers, not many cared much about having the best singing skills ever, like nowadays most Seiyu are obsessed with. But some things definitely changed thanks to what slapstick in the 70s and NG5 in the 80s did. Seiyu started to sell their music thanks to their looks. Fans were now really passionate to the point of following Seiyu units everywhere as if they were idols. There was a craze whenever a Seiyu unit announced his debut. Seiyu fans were definitely interested, well, at least female fans were, as most of Seiyu units debuted in the 90s had mainly female fans attending their events and following them around. So Seiyu started to be known for their faces. It was still not like today, in which the Seiyu and music industries have made Seiyu adapt to crazy ideals for their visuals, something I talked about on episodes 46 and 47, but as you go back and explore a bit of how 90s Seiyu units were revered by fangirls, you can tell that Seiyu started, in some way, taking more care about their looks if that meant selling more of everything they were releasing or working on. 90s Seiyu units were focused on selling looks and personalities more so than on showcasing their music. Still, you can't say that all things were shallow. Actually, the music industry was starting to warm up a little bit to Seiyu becoming singers. Many Seiyu were kicking off solo careers, Seiyu units were looked at with some strangeness by newcomers, but there was excitement within that niche that loved Seiyu. Which music genres were prominent? In general, music in the 90s was heavily inspired by 80s pop and rock. Classic 60s rock, synthwave and city pop, however, were music genres that influenced the most the music performed by Seiyu units in this second generation. You can say that, in a way, there was not much to take inspiration from in the Seiyu industry, especially with the Seiyu industry only having 2 Seiyu units debuted up until then. There were no winning formulas to follow. Music-wise, the path was rather clear to do what they wanted, and embracing plus experimenting with as many music genres as they wanted. As such, Seiyu units were performing classic 60s rock-inspired music, 80s hip-hop, R&B, pop, enka, Eurobeat, city pop, visual K-rock, and more. You can say that, in a way, the music from the 90s Seiyu units had a rebellious edge, even if most of the songs were rather filled with fluff and romance. This second generation of Seiyu units spread its wings and really did a bit of everything. Influences. While there were previous experiments with Seiyu units, those were few and too spread out within 2 decades, the 70s and the 80s. Seiyu hosting radio shows was starting to be a common thing. Up until then, it was still uncommon for Seiyu to perform opening or ending themes for anime series. Actually, it was in the 90s that Seiyu units started to perform music more frequently for anime series, or even stemming from such anime, ending up having awesome careers even after those series wrapped up. There were no 2D music projects. There were some Seiyu artists. Actually, the 90s was an extremely prolific decade for solo debuts. There were plenty, however, many careers were short-lived. There was little to no influence from other projects by Seiyu within the music industry or mixed media projects. Seiyu units were basically emulating J-pop music and Western pop and hip-hop, distancing themselves from the label Seiyu unit while trying their best to become a J-pop group. It was not an easy path, but surely the want to be seen and heard was the catalyst for some of the most iconic Seiyu units ever to debut. Music quality. If you revisit songs from Seiyu units or even Seiyu solo artists from this generation, you'll notice that those sound relatively dated. So right off the bat, the songs weren't composed nor performed with longevity as one of its objectives. No Seiyu unit or even Seiyu artist back in the 90s was thinking about turning into a star. It was near impossible. Much less for their music to be popular outside of their fanbase or even to be listened to by new fans or Seiyu music enthusiasts decades later. Having a sound characteristically true to the 90s and with strong 80s influences makes it so that going back to the CDs released by these units feels like a trip down the memory lane. Almost like you opened a dust-covered box of memories. There were plenty of Seiyu showcasing good, some even impressive, singing skills. Others made the best of joining Seiyu units to showcase that they are good musicians or even entertainers, even to the expense of their poor singing skills. While there were still many Seiyu that joined Seiyu units, most without any singing skills, some even tone deaf, there was quality in the 90s. The quality of the recordings was dodgy at times, with some CDs even sounding like the vocals were recorded with radio microphones instead of the large diaphragm microphones used to recording singing on a professional level. The instrumentals were not really complex, the lyrics were equally not groundbreaking, being mostly about mundane things, or in case the Seiyu units stemmed from radio shows or were connected to manga or anime, about the topics that those covered. You can say that at its core, everything about the music by the second generation of Seiyu units was simple, and the quality will fall into what is now called lo-fi. Low quality of the sound and recordings, cheap, simple cover art, and they were ready to go. Seiyu units were aiming to please their own fans, not everyone. That was a really good mindset. And it worked relatively well. Some units may even say that it worked incredibly well. In some way, the 90s were a decade of experimentation for Seiyu units, so it is expected that you'll get that feeling that no one in the studio had a clear idea of what they wanted to pull off with those songs. I find this to be one of the charms about the music of Seiyu units in the 90s. Units that marked this generation of Seiyu units. I've talked plenty about 2 units that definitely marked this decade and ended up changing the music panorama for all other Seiyu units that followed. In this episode, however, I bring you a couple of other interesting units alongside those that were doing awesome things despite not many people noticing them. EMU. This decade started to be impressive by the hands of EMU, or EMU. The Seiyu unit consisted of Hideo Ishikawa, vocals and drums, Hikaru Midorikawa, vocals and bass, Ryotaro Okyayu, vocals and guitar, Nobuto Shikana, vocals and lead guitar, and Daisuke Sakaguchi, vocals and keys, and they were known for their addictive pop-rock sound. EMU kicked off as a Seiyu group stemming from the drama CD Graduation M. This was unprecedented. Never before had a Seiyu unit made a debut because of a drama CD. The Seiyu unit was active from 1995 up until 2000, releasing 4 singles, 8 full-length albums, and holding 6 live tours that were later on released on VHS. They were on the cover of magazines, they were invited to TV shows, talk, variety, and music-related ones. They were holding handshake events. Their photo and songbooks sold out immediately. Fangirls fainted left and right. EMU was a sensation. The group had the reactions that NG5 in 1989 received, but they took it a couple of steps further and turned into a widely known group that even those not fans of Seiyu were aware of. That was both surprising and impressive, bringing a whole lot of exposure to the 5-piece group. Can safely say that EMU was part of a mixed media project, the first ever mixed media project, titled Graduation M. The Seiyu unit, radio show, games, TV appearances and live events all tied up with Graduation M, the manga published in 1996. Their pop-rock sound was addictive, their performances quite innovative for that time. Those 5 years of activity set EMU in stone as one of the most successful Seiyu units of all time, which is, yet again, impressive. The popularity that all members got as part of EMU would end up carrying over to their activities as solo artists, during the group's activities and even after disbandment. EMU made Seiyu artists massively popular in the 90s. There is no doubt about it. Their image was friendly, their music easy listening. They were doing everything right, and that translated into what is still one of the most successful endeavors a Seiyu unit has experienced. While Slapstick and NG5 shyly opened the doors for Seiyu to become singers and join Seiyu units and be respected plus loved, EMU opened those doors ajar, making everyone notice them. To this date, there is no other Seiyu unit that has managed to have such an impressive path in the music industry. ASR. In 1996, the first ever mixed unit, which is to say, with male and female Seiyu in the lineup, was ASR. ASR, or Assemble Resolution, made its debut in 1996, stemming from the video game Cube Battler. The lineup included Naozumi Takahashi and Manami Komori. Up until 1996, there had been no mixed Seiyu units. ASR appeared as something new and a bit strange at that time. Contrary to most Seiyu units in this episode, ASR was not popular, ending up forgotten despite being a trailblazer unit. The duo had a really interesting dynamic, with Komori writing lyrics to all songs and Takahashi composing most of their songs. Before their disbandment in 2001, the duo released 1 full-length album and 2 singles. SMAP. Another mixed Seiyu unit joined the industry, however, with something different at its core. It stemmed from a radio show. SMAP debuted in 1997, signed to King Records. It had an easy listening pop rock sound that attracted some fans of Seiyu back then. The group consisted of Kentaro Ito, Ryotaro Okyayu, Mitsuaki Madono, Tomoko Kawakami, and Omi Minami. SMAP was active from 1997 up until 1998 in what was a strangely brief career for a Seiyu unit signed to a major music label such as King Records. Before their disbandment, the unit released one single. Vice. 1998 would be the year that would welcome the first ever Seiyu unit with Visual Kei inspired visuals. Vice consisted of Shinichiro Miki, Tomokazu Seki, Takehito Koyasu, and Yuki Hiro. Vice was the first ever 2.5 unit or group stemming from a mixed media project, in this case Vice Kreutz, with Seiyu performing on stage as the characters that were, in this case, modeled after their Seiyu. This was a refreshing idea. Character designs taking inspiration from Seiyu's looks and personality. Then the Seiyu performing on stage as the characters. In a way, what was created here would end up influencing today's 2D groups, that later on ended up being represented and promoted by their Seiyu cast in live shows and tours. And you can even see some 2D music projects today casting Seiyu to voice characters that have uncanny similarities to their personality or looks. Vice started that for 2D groups. At the same time, and much in line with Slapstick's whole thing of Seiyu being extremely involved in their project, Vice Kreutz was a concept idea by Takehito Koyasu. Vice Kreutz ended up having an anime series, manga, live shows headlined by Vice, radio shows, and drama CDs. Vice's sound was dirty and aggressive. Rock was their element, with most songs being shredding, cool tunes made to headbang along. At the same time, Vice was the first Seiyu unit to have animated music videos for their songs. This was a novelty back then that mesmerized a lot of people. Little did they know that this nifty innovation would usher in an era in which 2D groups would have music videos, and those would even draw more attention than live-action music videos. Also, the group was opening the doors for Seiyu units to promote themselves differently by not appearing in their music videos. It was unconventional, but such an awesome idea that opened the possibilities to reach new target audiences. Vice opened its fan club, which was yet something unheard of. It was yet another crafty idea to make the best out of their popularity, cashing in as much as possible for their work. Vice was at the forefront of innovation for Seiyu units with a unique concept, format, even down to its presentation. People were genuinely impressed. The group debuted in 1998 and went on to have a successful career. The unit released 8 singles, 5 full-length albums, 2 special fan club albums, 3 photo books, as well as a music video collection DVD. Vice disbanded in 2003 after an impressive display of innovation. When I look back to 90 Seiyu units, Vice is undoubtedly the one that impresses me the most for how much they tried to continuously innovate, always being a couple of steps ahead of the competition, while at the same time and unknowingly paving the way for the Seiyu and 2D units that followed. While the Seiyu unit disbanded in 2003, the project Vice Kreutz was active until 2019, when it was announced that it would go to rest indefinitely. Hands All Stars. In 1998, a rock duo made its debut. Hands All Stars stemmed from a radio show hosted by Hideo Ishikawa and Shotaro Morikubo that aired from 1998 up until 1999. Despite the short-lived radio show, the duo had a passionate following during its 11 years of career. Yes, this Seiyu unit was active for a whole decade before calling it quits, which is quite impressive. Hideo Ishikawa was in charge of vocals and Shotaro Morikubo was in charge of vocals and guitar. In a way, Morikubo's work as a member of Hands All Stars would end up opening the doors for his solo debut with Lantis in 2001. The duo started holding live shows in 1999, something that prompted them to add a bassist and drummer to the band. However, at their core, Hands All Stars was still a duo. Under the concept of jamming, The band's rock sound had a freeing vibe, although it could get heavy from time to time. The blend of Ishikawa's robust and extremely versatile vocals and Morikubu's powerful baritone vocals added a layer of toughness, making their sound quite muscular and intense. They showed that Seiyu could get on stage and improvise, have a good time and create enjoyable music, lasting for a long time in the music industry. Although not many people look at END's All Stars as an important Seiyu unit, I do see them as pivotal for Seiyu bands to stop caring about rules and simply have fun creating, sharing their love for music with each other and their fans. END's All Stars called it quits in 2009, leaving behind them 2 singles, 3 full-length albums, and 3 live tours, as well as a total of 19 live performances for fans to remember them by. EMU, ASR, SMAP, Vice, and END's All Stars have all influenced the music industry as we now see it. EMU showed that Seiyu units can be pop idols. ASR opened the doors for shuffle or mixed groups. SMAP showed that you can have awesome Seiyu units stemming from radio shows. Vice was a trailblazer in terms of image, concept, music, and everything about its business model and presence in the media. And END's All Stars showed that Seiyu can found rock bands and have a blast while impressing everyone with their skills. Without these Seiyu units, it is safe to say that the music industry wouldn't be that welcoming of Seiyu artists to the groups and Seiyu units. And that's why the second generation of Seiyu units was absolutely awesome. When you look back in time and see what these Seiyu units pulled off, it's an awesome feeling. Going through history unfolding, checking their innovations and noticing how those ended up changing the music panorama for Seiyu units to the groups and solo artists puts a smile on my face. Seiyu's passion for music in the 90s, following what the Seiyu units Slapstick and NG5 did in the 70s and 80s, ended up opening doors for the following generations, enabling them with the right tools, formulas to follow, and a public excitedly waiting for them. And while EMU, ASR, SMAP, Vice, and END's All Stars' music may pale in comparison with what is now released and most units are not even talked about anymore, they have a special place in Seiyu history and fully deserve your attention. So tell me, what do you think was the most impressive thing that 90s Seiyu units pulled off? I must say I'm impressed with Vice's ability to turn a mixed media project into a money-making machine while making animated music videos a thing and having a massive following due to their passionate rock sound and visual kei looks. This is easily one of the most impressive Seiyu units to date for all the things it brought to the Seiyu industry. So let me know your opinion in the comments on YouTube. And remember, leave your comments as complex or as simple as they may be, and you can be featured on upcoming episodes of Seiyu Lounge. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss the Hand That Feeds HQ's weekly mail Seiyu and music-related content, hit the subscribe button. I'll return next week with another episode of Seiyu Lounge. Thank you for listening, and see you guys around.